Okay, so exercise 5. Now here we are given something new. First of all, we are given a subgroup H of a group G, and A is any element in G. Previously we defined the right coset of H in G by the element A. Now correspondingly we define the left coset of H in G by the element A, which naturally you can guess it is the set of all elements that look like this, where this element H varies over the subgroup H. Now we have to show that the set of all left cosets of H in G is actually having a one-to-one correspondence with the set of all right cosets of H in G. This in particular means that if H is of finite index in G, that means if there are only finitely many right cosets of H in G, then there will also be finitely many left cosets of H in G, and the two numbers will be equal. Okay, so let us see how we can solve this. So we need these sets of left cosets and right cosets. So let us denote them by something. Let L and R be the set of all left cosets of H in G and the set of all right cosets of H in G respectively. We now have to define a function between these two sets such that it turns out to be a one-to-one correspondence. So we are going to do that like this. Define a function f from R into L by, so we have to map a right coset onto a left coset. So an arbitrary right coset of H in G looks like this HA, and its F image should be a left coset. We decided to be not AH but A inverse of H. Why we are taking inverse, that will become clear once we start working with this function. So having defined this function, we now have to, our first job is to see whether this function is well defined. That means whether equal inputs give us equal outputs. Okay, so for that we have to take two equal inputs, that means two right cosets that are equal. So let HA and HB be two elements in R such that HA is equal to HB. Our aim now is to show that f of HA is equal to f of HB. That means their f images are equal, or in other words, A inverse H should be equal to B inverse H. So we have to prove that. So that we will do, since we have to show an equality of two sets. So we will prove first of all that A inverse H is a subset of B inverse H. So for that we consider an element. Let A inverse H belong to A inverse capital H, where H belongs to capital H. Now what happens to the inverse of this element. According to the formula for the inverse of a product of two elements, this will be H inverse times A inverse inverse. That means this is equal to H inverse A. Now H inverse A is an element in HA. And why is that so? That is because you see, H is in capital H and capital H is a subgroup. So H inverse, this single inverse, will be again in capital H. So by definition of this right coset, this will belong to HA. But HA, according to the way we have taken HA and HB, this is equal to HB. In bracket we can write, note that H inverse belongs to H because H is a subgroup of G. Since we are still working with elementary group theoretic techniques, so we will write things in detail for now at least. The more we go ahead, the less we will write such justifications, okay, because by then we will have become accustomed to such things. So this is equal to HB, and hence A inverse H inverse, since it now belongs to the right coset HB, so it will be equal to H prime B for some element H prime belonging to H. This implies, now if we take inverse on both sides, on the left hand side the two inverses will cancel each other and we will have the element itself, that means A inverse H. On the right hand side, however, we will have to take the inverse of H prime B, and this will be equal to B inverse H prime inverse. Now note carefully that again, since H prime belongs to H, H prime inverse also belongs to H, because H is a subgroup, but this time we are not going to write that thing. We have already written it once. So this belongs to the left coset B inverse H. So this arbitrary element in the left coset A inverse H has been proven to be in the left coset B inverse H. Thus, A inverse H is contained in B inverse H. Since the situation is symmetric with respect to A and B, I mean you can interchange the roles of A and B here in the whole thing without affecting the arguments. So B inverse H is also a subset of A inverse H. Do you understand what I am trying to say? A and B we can interchange, because after all they are just arbitrary elements in R and they are also symmetric with respect to this relation. You can write HB here, you can write HA there and run the whole argument with A and B interchanged. Still you will have the same thing. I mean still the argument will hold. Now, instead of writing elaborately that since the situation is symmetric with respect to A and B, we can write in short, from symmetry we also have B inverse H contained in A inverse H. So what is the F image of HA? That is A inverse H, that is now equal to B inverse H, and this is the F image of HB. This shows that F is well defined. That means F is a legitimate function and we can work with it. If it's not well defined, then it's not a function, it's only a relation. Okay, now we will show that F is one-to-one and onto. Ontoness is almost immediate, although we have to write some things. Now we show that F is onto. So for that, what we have to do, we have to take an element here and we have to show that it is coming from some element in R. That means we have to take a left coset and we have to show that it is coming from some right coset. Let any left coset, let CH be an element in L. When we say CH belongs to L, you have to understand that this C is an element in G. Then we can write CH like this. CH is equal to C inverse H. That can be written because C is equal to the inverse of C. And since C inverse itself is after all some element in G, so this is nothing but the F image of the right coset HC inverse, where also don't forget to mention the fact that HC inverse belongs to R. Although when we are writing this, it is assumed that HC inverse has to come from R, but still it does not hurt to write that additionally, just to show that this is the input for which we are getting CH as the output. Thus, F is onto. Now next we show F is one-to-one. So for one-to-oneness, what we have to do, we have to take two elements in R and we have to basically do whatever we have done here, the opposite of whatever we have done here. That means we will take two elements in the domain and we will assume that their F images are equal. We have to then prove that the elements themselves are equal. That is, if we have equal output, we have to prove that the inputs are also equal. That proves one-to-oneness. But if you prove that you have equal inputs and that implies you have equal outputs, that is proving that the function is well defined, which we have done here. Okay. So let us take something else, HC. Oh, we have already taken HC. let us take H alpha and H beta. You can take HA and HB also, because once you have finished proving something, the role of HA and HB are over. They were just any elements in R and they continue to be arbitrary elements in R. So here we are taking H alpha and H beta in R such that their F images are equal. That is, alpha inverse H is equal to beta inverse H. We have to now prove that H alpha is equal to H beta. So let us take an element in H alpha. Let belongs to H alpha where H belongs to H. Okay. Then you take the inverse of this element. H alpha inverse is equal to alpha inverse H inverse, and this belongs to alpha inverse H. Now we are no longer saying that H inverse belongs to H. We already know that, because H belongs to H and capital H is a subgroup, so the inverse of small h will also belong to capital H. And from this condition we get this beta inverse H which implies H alpha inverse whole inverse is equal to beta inverse H prime for some H prime belonging to H. Thus, if we now take inverse on both sides, we will have H alpha inverse is equal to beta inverse H prime whole inverse, and that is equal to H prime inverse times inverse of the inverse of beta, which is nothing but beta itself, and this belongs to H beta. So we have I written something wrong? Here I considered H alpha, which implies, oh, I have taken inverse here, sorry. H alpha is equal to this. Okay, sorry about this, it will be H alpha. Okay, so this belongs to H beta. So H alpha was any element in capital H alpha, now it belongs to capital H beta. So H alpha is contained in H beta. Again, just like before, from symmetry we have H beta contained in H alpha. So now we have what we want. So this implies H alpha is equal to H beta. That means That means the inputs are equal based on the assumption that the outputs are equal. So the function has to be 1 to 1. Thus f is 1 to 1, and actually this ends the solution. If you want, you can write one additional line, and that hence f is a 1 to 1 correspondence between R and L. So we will have the same cardinality of these sets of left cosets and right cosets of a single subgroup. Okay, next exercise 6. Write out the right cosets of H in G. Where there are subdivisions. Subdivision A is G is a cyclic group, is a cyclic group of order 10, and H is the cyclic subgroup generated by A square. Subdivision B, G is as in part A, same as this one, and H this time is the cyclic subgroup generated by A to the power 5. And there is a part C also. In part C, G is the group of all bijections on the set S, where S is an element having S is a set having 3 elements. In other words, here G is nothing but S3, and H is the subgroup of all elements sigma in G. That means sigma is a bijection on S that keeps the element x1 fixed, that does not change x1. Okay. So in part A we have a cyclic group of order 10 where the generator is some element A. So this means here G consists of these symbols A to the power 9. It has order 10 because there are 9 positive integral powers of A along with the identity, and A to the power 10 is supposed to be that identity. And if in this group we consider the cyclic subgroup generated by A square, then we will have these things, all the integral powers of a square. So we start with e, then a square, a to the power 4, a to the power 8. If you keep on squaring these elements, if you take the square here, you will get a to the power 16, and since a to the power 10 is identity, so by the rules of exponent, a to the power 16 is actually equal to a to the power 6, and then you will get, if you square that, you will get a to the power 12, which equals a square, and then you have come back, actually it forms a loop. After a square you will again have a to the power 4, a to the power 6, and it goes on like that. So these are the only elements. So now we have to actually find out the right cosets of h in G. But before that, it will be helpful to find out exactly how many right cosets there will be of h in G, which we already know from our formula for the index of h in G. Since the index of h in G is equal to order of G divided by order of h, which in this case is what? G has 10 elements and h has how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is equal to 2. There are only two distinct right cosets of h in G. Okay, what about the right coset HA? Let us actually calculate. Since we have the elements of h, we can calculate HA. You multiply all the elements from the right by a. So the exponents will increase by 1. A cube, a to the power 5, a to the power 7, and a to the power 9. Since this is not equal to h, clearly this is not equal to h, because for example it has the element a which is not there in h. The distinct right cosets are h and HA. Let's say these are the two right cosets. Then part B. Here G continues to be the same group, but H is different. H now is the cyclic subgroup generated by a to the power 5. A to the power 5. If we take the square of this, we get a to the power 10, which is again E. So these are the only two elements of H. Since the index of H in G in this case is what? Ten divided by 2 equal to 5. So here the number of cosets is more. There are 5 distinct right cosets of H in G, and they are as follows. One of them is H itself, which is this. Then we have HA, which consists of the elements A and A to the power 6. Then HA square, which has the elements A square and A to the power 7. Recall that the right cosets are actually nothing but equivalence classes of an equivalence relation. So they should be non-empty, and any two distinct ones should be mutually disjoint. So while calculating right cosets of a single subgroup, if you find two right cosets sharing some element, then that means you have made some sort of mistake. You see, all of them are having distinct elements, so that means we are okay. Two more, no? 1, 2, 3. HA cube. A cube A to the power 8 and HA to the power 4. That will be A to the power 4 and A to the power 9. One more thing is that if you take the union of these right cosets, you should get G, because that's what equivalence classes are. They partition the whole set. So they should be mutually disjoint and their union should be the whole set. Okay, so these are the right cosets. Finally we come to part C. You can observe one thing, that in both parts A and B, the group was an abelian group. In part C, however, we have S3, which is a non-abelian group, and we actually know its element structure. We know that in this case, since we are denoting things by G, which in this case is A of S, and we know its elements to be this, the mapping phi, the mapping psi. Recall these things from the examples of groups that we discussed about after the definition of a group. At one point we considered this example S3. There we saw these elements phi psi and psi phi, where if you want you can, okay, just for the sake of completeness, let's recall what phi and psi were. Where let me write informally, okay, just for the sake of remembering what these functions were. Clearly, in a solution you should not write these things because it's not a standard notation. So phi was the function that sends x1 to x2 and x2 to x1, and it does not change x3. And psi was the function that sends x1 to x2, x2 to x3 and x3 to x1. Okay. Oh, we have to write h also, and h is supposed to be the subgroup consisting of those functions that do not change x1. So clearly phi and psi, neither of them will be, none of them will be in this subgroup. Instead, here what we have is this, the identity function and psi phi. You can in fact verify that psi phi does not change x1. If we apply psi phi to x1, keep in mind here the composition that we have is formed in such a way that the input appears on the left hand side to the left of the function. So we will first apply psi and then we will apply phi. So psi takes x1 to x2 and phi takes x2 to x1. So x1 is taken to x1 by psi phi. So x1 is not changed. And identity of course does not change anything. So in particular it also does not change x1. And these two happen to be the only bijections that do not change x1. Since index of h in G in this case is 6 divided by 2,